When you were baptized, after the water was poured on you, and you died with Jesus, as Paul tells us in that second reading today, we put a sweet-smelling oil in the middle of your head on the top to anoint you in the same way that priests and prophets and kings were anointed in the Old Testament. And we tell you that in the prayer when we're putting that oil on your forehead, on your head, that you are to be a priest and a prophet and a king. All of you. All of us who are baptized into those ministries. Priests are ones who offer sacrifice to God in the Old Testament. So you and I are to give gifts to God, to offer sacrifice. As kings, we're to rule over our little kingdom. May not be much of one, but this is our little kingdom to rule over. But I always think the prophet one maybe confuses people a little bit, like, I don't ever foretell the future. And I think, no, that's not what prophets did. They did not foretell the future. If I had some of that in me, I would have invested better when I was younger, and I wouldn't have to be a priest. I could just go out. No. No, prophets in the Old Testament were people who spoke with God. So Moses was one of the first of the great prophets because he spoke to God. He listened to God. And you and I are all called to do that, to talk to God, to listen to God. Now, one of the problems with prophets is that because they listened to God, they tended to get themselves into trouble because they would tell the truth to the kings and to leaders, and the kings and leaders didn't like hearing that truth, and so oftentimes you kind of ran away from prophets because they were being chased by the military or the police because of their speaking truth. So today when Jesus says, if you give something to a prophet, you get a prophet's reward, what the church gives us is that first reading today to help us understand a little bit of what a prophet's life was like. So they edited it down, though. So we only get part of the story, so do you mind if I fill you in on a little bit more of Elisha and this woman from Shunem? This is an interesting little tidbit of the second book of Kings there. So Elisha, rather than Elijah, Elijah was the one who trained Elisha. Elijah is the one who went up to heaven in the chariot and gives his mantle to Elisha. But actually Elisha does more than Elijah. So their name, Elijah, means God is, and Elisha means God saves. So that's how you can tell them apart. But a lot of times in English, we just change the pronunciation to Elisha. So people don't get them confused when you're putting both of them together. But anyway, Elisha's out doing prophet stuff, and he is on this kind of major interstate where he walks that goes by this town of Shunem. And there's this prominent couple there. That's how she is described. She's a prominent lady in the community. So she's on all the boards, she does good things, and everybody listens to her. We just don't know her name, but she's there, and she sees Elisha go by all the time, and she likes talking to him because he's like a good guy. So she talks to him, and then she starts inviting him in for dinner. Well, while you're here, just come in and eat. She's just being very hospitable. And he goes on that road all the time because he's living up a Carmel on the coast, and this road to Shunem is in the valley, so it's an easy way to get over toward the Sea of Galilee. So he goes by her house all the time. So she says to her husband, hey, he comes by here all the time. Why don't we build a room for him and put it on the roof so that he can have his own place to stay when he comes? So they put it, as you heard in that first reading, a chair, a bed, a little table for him. Reminds me a little bit of the Wild West days in this country when they were circuit preachers. People had front rooms built onto their house for the preacher and the priest to come into late at night if your horse, was slow and you got in there and you don't want to wake up the family. They'd leave that little room open for you. Some of you, if you have rural relatives, might always wonder about that front room on the house. What was this room for? And it's for the preacher. Anyway, so he's got his own little room up there. And he's up there one day with his administrative assistant, and they're having a nice little conversation. And he says, we should do something for these people. What do you think we should do? And the administrative assistant says, well, they say they don't need anything because, they have money and they're prominent and they don't need anything. And she takes care of herself and she helps others. And the assistant says, you know what? They don't have any kids. So maybe, we could help them get a kid. And Elisha says, well, that's a good idea. And her husband is getting up there in years, and when he dies, if she doesn't have a son, who's going to take care of her when she gets old? So he goes to her and he says, hey, you know what? I know you don't need anything, but I just want to tell you that next year at this time when we get here, you're going to have a baby. Now, her response is very interesting. Her response is, don't get my hopes up again. I don't want to be, nope, don't lie to me. Don't joke around with that. And he says, no, I'm not joking. I'm going to talk to God and see if we can get that arranged. And off he goes, and he comes back later that year, and yep, she has a baby. They go, okay. And she's very happy having that baby, and that's where this part of the story ends. But that's not the whole story. Because when the baby grows up a little bit, he's 4 years old, he's out playing one day with his dad, and he gets a really bad headache. And the dad does what good dads do when their kids are sick. He takes him to mom. Gives him to mom, and mom holds him, and he has this terrible headache, and he dies in her arms at 4. So what does she do? She doesn't tell anybody. She takes his body upstairs to Elisha's room and lays it on the bed, and then she locks the door and goes out. And she tells her husband, bring some of the workers over here and get a carriage ready for me. I'm going to see Elisha. And her husband says, why are you going to see Elisha? Because it's not the Sabbath. It's not a high holy day. Why are you going to see him? And she says, just because I want to. Well, is everything okay? Oh, yeah, it's all okay. And off she goes, 20 miles. To Carmel, gets there, and the servant runs into her first and says, hey, that lady from Shunem is here. And Elisha says, well, that's really odd that she's here. What's going on? He said, I don't know. And then she comes up to see him, and she said, I told you not to get my hopes up, and you got my hopes up, and now my kid is not doing well. And Elisha knows right away, oh, this is bad. The kid's in really bad shape. He says, oh, I'll come And so he sends his administrative assistant on ahead with her, and then he comes as quickly as he can, and he gets there and they show him the room, and he does some kind of artificial respiration on the kid. He, as the scripture says, he put his face on the kid's face, his eyes on the kid's eyes, his mouth on the kid's mouth. He laid on him, and then the kid sneezed and woke up. And you think, wow, there was a resurrection there. That kid had been dead for hours. Not as long as Lazarus, 4 days, but he had been dead for a while. The church expects you to know that story, because it only gives you part of it, so that you know that if you help a prophet, you get a prophet's reward. So that Jesus tells you in today's gospel about these rewards that all of us get if we're hospitable, if we're truly his followers. But you and I know that the greatest reward is what the prophet has from the very beginning, which is a relationship with God. That's what truly matters after all. It's because of Elisha's relationship with God that he's able to do all those kind of things. And that's what you and I have if we have that relationship as well. Then other people's lives are changed just because they encounter you. And they'll want to be with you and give you some of those rewards and invite you in to their lives. It's a treasure we all get at baptism because we have died with Jesus and risen with him and have this ongoing relationship. You are a treasure that he entrusts, and our world needs that treasure.